Okay, so there's a lot going on in Minneapolis right now. We're talking about a city completely on edge. You've got federal officers clashing with protesters, and then the White House drops a threat we haven't heard in decades. So what is actually happening on the ground there? We're going to break it all down. The protests, the politics, and this really powerful law that's suddenly at the center of everything.
So, if you were on the ground in Minneapolis, the scene is just incredibly tense. We're hearing from AP News that smoke from tear gas is literally filling the air. You've got federal officers trying to disperse crowds, and the sound of flashbangs just echoing through the streets. You can just feel how much these confrontations are escalating.
And it's a real clash. On one side, you've got federal officers decked out in gas masks and helmets, and on the other, you have protesters pushing right back, throwing rocks and even fireworks. It's become this intense standoff, and it's basically locked the entire city in a stalemate that's been going on for days now.
So you have to wonder, right? How did things get this bad? I mean, these kinds of clashes, they don't just happen overnight. To really get what's going on in Minneapolis, to understand how it reached this boiling point, we've got to rewind a bit and look at what happened in the weeks before all this kicked off.
Okay, so the origins of all this, it really seems to trace back to two specific events. These were the moments that really cranked up the tension between federal authorities and the community there. First, you had this huge immigration crackdown from the Department of Homeland Security. We're talking a massive operation that led to more than 2,000 arrests just in Minnesota. Then, on January 7th, things took a really tragic turn. The whole operation became deadly when an ICE agent shot and killed a resident named Renee Good. And that was the spark. That's what really ignited the protests we're seeing now.
So while Minneapolis is trying to deal with all this on the ground, the conflict suddenly jumps to a whole new level. I mean, it goes all the way up to the White House. And that's when we get this really extraordinary and super rare threat from the president.
Yeah, President Trump went on social media and put out a direct threat. And here's the exact quote. "If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law, I will institute the Insurrection Act and quickly put an end to the travesty." Wow. I mean, that just dramatically raised the stakes, right? Suddenly, it's not just protesters versus officers, it's the entire federal government versus the state of Minnesota.
And you can see just how divided the government is on this. It's a total split. On the one hand, you have the White House saying, hey, our federal officers are just trying to do their job and a president has every right to act. But then you look at Minnesota officials and they are pushing back hard. The governor, Tim Walz, is basically pleading for everyone to turn the temperature down while the state's attorney general is getting ready to fight this in court if they have to.
Okay, so this all brings us to the big question, right? The core of this whole threat, the Insurrection Act. It's a name that most of us, we just don't hear every day. So what exactly is this law, and why is it such a massive deal to even threaten to use it?
Well, this law goes way, way back to 1807. And what it does is it gives the president this incredible power to deploy the U.S. military on American soil, to act as law enforcement. And that is a huge deal. Normally, there's another law, the Posse Comitatus Act, that says you can't do that. You can't use the military like a domestic police force. This act is basically the big exception to that rule.
And when I say it's rare, I mean incredibly rare. To give you some perspective, the last time it was actually used was way back in 1992. That was when President George H.W. Bush sent troops into Los Angeles during the riots. But here's the really crucial difference. Back then, he did it because the governor of California asked for help. This time, the threat is being made completely against the wishes of the local and state officials. That changes everything.
So you've got this huge political and legal fight playing out. But what does that actually mean for the regular people living in Minneapolis, This isn't just some abstract debate. It's having very, very real consequences on the ground. And the whole city is just kind of holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next.
The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, I think he really summed up how local leaders are feeling. He said, and I'm quoting here, "This is an impossible situation that our city is presently being put in." You can just hear the frustration. They feel like they're caught right in the middle, between federal actions on one side and a community in crisis on the other, just trying to keep everyone safe.
And the impact is spreading out, way beyond just the protest sites. Because everyone's worried about safety, huge institutions are changing how they operate. We're talking about the Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools, and even the University of Minnesota. They're all shifting to online learning. It's a perfect example of how this high-level political showdown can directly mess with the daily lives of tens of thousands of families.
So when you strip it all down, that's what we're left with. A fundamental clash between federal power and local authority.
And what's happening in Minneapolis, it really forces us to ask a question that's way bigger than just one city. Where exactly is the line between federal intervention and a state's right to handle its own affairs? And more importantly, what happens when that line isn't in a law book, but is drawn right on the streets of an American